EU leaders have postponed a decision on freeing up billions of euros in frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. The complex plan would provide Kyiv with a 140 billion euro loan. That means Russia's funds would technically not be confiscated outright because under international law, sovereign assets cannot be taken. The money is being held in Belgium, which has asked for guarantees it won't be held liable should Russia pursue legal action. What EU members did, however, agree on was phasing out the import of Russian gas.
The European Union hit Russia with a new set of sanctions, its 19th package, and the first to target Russian gas. While the bloc has significantly reduced purchase of Russian oil since the invasion of Ukraine, it's kept buying gas, a record amount last year that filled Moscow's war chest against Kyiv. The EU package was cleared hours after US President Donald Trump announced his own sanctions targeting two of Russia's largest oil companies. In short, after days of back and forth from the Oval Office, as Trump announced a meeting with Putin and later called it off, met Zelensky but denied Ukraine Tomahawk missiles, the week is ending more positively for Kyiv.
We have sanctions on Russian energy. We don't have meeting in Hungary without Ukraine. And we have not yet Tomahawks. That's it. This is the result. I think not bad.
But Zelensky said Europeans too have long-range missiles and that he would be happy to buy those and more from Europe with Russian frozen assets. He also wants the option to buy American weapons if needed. The EU, however, is grappling with Belgium as it holds out against deploying 140 billion euro of Russian assets lying in a Brussels-based financial depositor. It could scare off investors, and Belgium fears it may be subject to Russian retaliation, legal and financial, and wants other member states to share the risks.
We want guarantees if the money has to be paid back, that every member state will chip in. The consequences cannot only be for Belgium.
At the end of the day, EU leaders did not reach a breakthrough. That has effectively delayed plans to make Russia pay for its war.
For more, let's bring in DW's Brussels correspondent, Teri Schultz. Teri, why is using frozen assets such a thorny subject at the EU level?
Well, it's really because, Nicole, this isn't EU money to use. And so what the European Union is doing is trying to come up with a system that makes primarily Belgium comfortable enough to allow the money that's held in a holding facility here in Belgium to allow it to be used by the EU. Now, it is very complicated, and many of us journalists have spent the last days getting involved in the nitty-gritty details of what makes this so complicated. And really what Belgium is saying is that because they would be allowing the 140 billion to be used from a facility here in this country, if Russia comes back for that money at the end of the war or in an international lawsuit, really only Belgium would be liable for it. And so what the Belgian government has done is gone to the other 26 EU leaders and said, OK, you need to share the risk with us. Literally, the Belgian prime minister says that he puts a piece of paper in front of the other members and says, you sign for part of the share of this liability. And suddenly they're not so keen on using the money. So there remains a lot of negotiations ahead on whether other EU members will share the risk. Now, the European Commission has now been tasked with putting forward a plan on exactly how this would work. And Belgium says it really doesn't have to say anything more until it sees that plan.
Just to give our viewers some context, you mentioned this holding facility. Why is most of the Russian money that has been seized stored in Belgium?
Well, that was a decision by Russia, I presume. There's also money stored in other countries. Euroclear is this facility which it has a really high level of international trust until now anyway. And many countries store their assets here. So it's just by chance that it's located in Belgium. And in fact, the Belgians apparently offer other countries to take this facility now that it's become so controversial. And no one is exactly rushing forward to do that either. But another thing the Belgians are saying is that, hey, you other countries that hold smaller amounts of Russian assets, you need to come forward with us and also hand over that amount of money to the European Commission to use in funding this loan to Ukraine, and then we will feel in much better company. And, the Belgians say we're definitely not against helping Ukraine, and leaders say there's really no plan B for coming up with some other huge pot of money like this. So they just want to make sure that they are not left alone if by international law Russia can come back and ask for that money. And I think that, it seems very understandable. 140 billion is a lot of money for any single country, especially one as small as Belgium.
Absolutely. After yesterday's meeting, do you get the sense that it has become any more likely for the EU to use these funds to help Ukraine?
I think at least it's a step forward. We don't know yet whether the other member states will come forward to back up Belgium, and that's really what has to happen. Everybody really understands exactly what the Commission wants to do, to not actually confiscate the money, but use it as a guarantee, and then force Russia to pay reparations to Ukraine. It's really a very clever plan to try to get Russia to pay for the damage it's caused to Ukraine, and perhaps even fund some of the weapons that Ukraine needs to defend itself. But it will depend on the other member states, on the solidarity that they will show with the Belgian government. And it's impossible to predict.
Teri Schultz in Brussels. Thanks so much, Teri. And a quick look at some other stories making headlines around the world today. Lithuania says Russian warplanes have violated its airspace, posting on social media about the incursion from Russia's Kaliningrad region. President Gitanas Nausėda said Vilnius would summon Russian embassy representatives. Lithuania's military posted that Spanish Eurofighter Typhoon jets were scrambled in response.
Well, the EU summit comes a day after the US unveiled new sanctions targeting Russia's oil industry. President Donald Trump announced the sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil, Russia's biggest oil producers, hoping to pressure the Kremlin to negotiate a ceasefire in Ukraine. Russia says that plan will fail. Putin has also accused Europe of clinging to, quote, ineffective measures. Meantime, Trump says he has shelved a planned meeting with Putin in Budapest. Vladimir Putin says the fresh sanctions are a, quote, unfriendly act that could backfire, but he's downplayed the impact on Russia.
They are, of course, serious for us, it's clear, and they will have certain consequences. However, they will not have a significant impact on our economy.
We're joined now by Angela Stent, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and author of the book Putin's World, Russia Against the West and With the Rest. Welcome back to DW. Now, Vladimir Putin seems to be shrugging off these latest US sanctions, but perhaps also conceding that they might cause some economic pain. What do you make of that?
So on the one hand, the Russians want to make out as if this really isn't going to affect them that much. But on the other hand, we saw already today the Russian stock market was down a lot. And in the long run, if these sanctions work, then Russia really will have less hard currency earnings and less of the financial wherewithal to continue prosecuting this war. So, of course, they want to downplay it. But in reality, it could have a significant impact on their economy if there isn't too much evasion of this. The Indians, India and China are the two largest purchasers of Russian oil, and the Indians are already making alternative arrangements. It's not clear what the Chinese will do. I think the Turks, the third largest buyer, are also making alternative agreements. So if it works out, it will have a significant impact on the Russian economy.
Now, you've just said if the sanctions work, Washington is hoping these sanctions will force Putin back to the negotiating table. Do you think they'll work?
It depends on how successful the Russians are in evading them. And we've seen in the last 3 years of the war, nearly 4 years now, that they have been quite successful in evading a lot of these oil sanctions. There's a whole shadow fleet that transports oil. So it depends whether they're able to continue doing this, whether there's more of a crackdown on it, and whether these secondary sanctions, on companies and countries that purchase Russian oil, whether they will be properly enforced or not. So these are all the unknowns at the moment.
Yeah, lots of unknowns, as you say. If, for argument's sake, the sanctions don't work, well, what sort of economic pressure from the US could actually bring Russia to the table?
Well, the energy sanctions, of course, if they work, are the most effective. There's still some more financial sanctions that could be put on Russia. But the main thing is to try and deprive Russia of these hard currency earnings that enable them to fuel their war machine.
Right. Now, a second US-Russia summit seems to be off the table for now after a bit of back and forth. Where do you think this leaves efforts to try and end the war in Ukraine?
Well, at the moment, it's a stalemate, and it really has been since the Alaska summit. I mean, really not very much has happened. What has happened is that for the first time yesterday, President Trump actually enforced and impose sanctions. Before, he had threatened to do it. It's the first time he's actually taken an action to pressure Russia, and we've waited 10 months for that. And hopefully it's the first of other actions. At the moment, he's not willing to send to provide Russia with the long-range missiles that the Ukrainians need, the Tomahawk missiles, and he was toying with doing it. Now he says he won't, but there may be other U.S. assistance. There may be greater permission for Ukrainians to use American weapons to strike deeper into Russia. So there are other ways that he can impose military pressure too. I think he's finally realized that Putin has been playing him all along, and that they agreed to this Budapest summit just to have then the Russian foreign minister reiterate Russia's maximalist demands in a call with the U.S. Secretary of State Rubio. So even that meeting, it was supposed to be a meeting between the two foreign ministers, that was also called off.
Thanks so much for that, Angela. That was Angela Stent, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. We really appreciate your insights today.
Thank you.